Okay, Alexander, we have got the EU Parliament calling for regime change in Russia. This is true. I'm going to read you a headline from RT. It says EU Parliament report says regime change is needed in Russia. Okay, it's needed in Russia. Recommends Brussels launch propaganda TV channel to help it happen. Now, keep in mind, I'm reading you a title from RT, which is Russian state media. But nonetheless, this is a true story. The Parliament, you've read
Absolutely.
the documents, you've read the statements. The Parliament is saying that in order to once again combat the evil, all-knowing, all-seeing dictator Vladimir Putin of Russia before he takes over the world and imposes his rule on the world, that the European Union should band together and save the world by creating a TV station and combating Putin's propaganda. Of course, I wonder if the people in Brussels have understood that TV is dying. Maybe they should start looking at creating some YouTube, Odyssey, BitChute channels, Super U channels, locals, maybe a locals community, so that they can combat the evil Putin, because Putin is taking over the world, according to them, and the Europeans have to do something. Once again, Alexander, just to sum it up, of course, Europe is talking about human rights and all of that garbage. Meanwhile, Assange is rotting in a prison. Free speech is being taken away. In Cyprus, they tried to enforce safe passes and papers so that you could go around to bars and restaurants. While I understand that Russia has none of that stuff, but, they're the ones committing the human rights atrocities, not Europe. Anyway, Alexander.
Well, absolutely. I mean, can I just say, you said it was from RT, but I have actually the document in front of me, and it is the most bizarre. It is the most ludicrous. It is, in some ways, the most comical document I've ever read. Comical, though, of course, it does have certain implications. Firstly, the language it is written in is just that of a first-year law student. It has, it starts having regard to previous resolutions on Russia, and then what all bad law students do. It has, whereas Russia is continuing its aggressive behavior, whereas the situation in Russia is deteriorating dreadfully, whereas these domestic developments are a warning to the EU, whereas, in its resolutions, the EU's policy vis-a-vis Russia agreed 5 guiding principles, etc. It's whereas. Where do you see that kind of language anywhere used anymore? Legal documents have essentially stopped using or talking in that kind of bizarre way. And of course, it is all about, evil Putin, the dictator, doing terrible things to his own people. And it is a straightforward call for regime change. And it includes some really very weird proposals. So if you go to page 5, you start with paragraph G there, which says that the EU and its member states should revise their investment support and economic cooperation projects, starting with halting the Nord Stream 2 project. Well, we now know that that's almost certainly going to happen, and that this should be done in line with the democracy first principle. The EU should strengthen the requirement of conditionality in its relations with Russia by including in any dialogue or agreement with Russia measures aimed at protecting human rights and the holding of free elections. Now, of course, free elections, human rights means don't arrest anybody who we support. Free elections, well, we'll come to what that means in a moment. So that's paragraph G. Then we go a bit further and we read paragraph I. It says the following: the EU should establish partnerships on its sanctions policy with EU-based non-governmental organisations such as Bellingcat, so that these organisations can assist it in preparing and investigating cases in a comprehensive way. So Bellingcat should have charge, in effect, of EU's foreign policy towards Russia. Note that it refers to Bellingcat as an EU-based non-governmental organisation. Hello, isn't Bellingcat British? Hasn't Britain actually left the EU? But there we go. Then we get paragraph M, and this is where the free elections thing comes. The EU must be prepared not to recognise the Parliament of Russia and to ask for Russia's suspension from international organisations with parliamentary assemblies if the 2021 parliamentary elections in Russia are recognised as fraudulent. Recognised by whom? By the EU, presumably. So that means that they would take it upon themselves to say that if your elections don't fulfil our criteria, i.e. if the people we want to see elected don't win, then we will not recognise your parliament as legitimate. And then, of course, you have the actual television station that you're talking about. That's paragraph L. The EU should confront the Russian language propaganda of President Putin's regime. So this is Russian, broadcast media in Russia itself, and support the establishment of a free Russia television with 24/7 airtime. So broadcast directly to Russia, propaganda channel to counter the propaganda that the evil Mr. Putin is supposedly spewing out. I mean, it's, as I said, it's flaky. It's absolutely bonkers. Now, this is only a recommendation. I can't imagine EU governments actually going down this lunatic road. If they did, it would be, frankly, a massive mistake by them, and I'm using my words carefully. But what it shows you is how detached from reality, how utterly surreal the EU and its institutions have become. This is from the Foreign Affairs Committee of the EU Parliament. It's certain, apparently, to be adopted in a vote by the European Parliament as a whole. I mean, if they pass a document like this, then firstly, not only have they taken leave of their senses, but they're not living on planet Earth, because this is a document that doesn't belong on planet Earth, when they don't even realise that Bellingcat is not a non-EU, an EU-based non-governmental organisation. I mean, these people just have no connection to any reality that I recognise. But the one thing it will do, of course, is it will make the Russians extremely angry, because they will see again that the EU is utterly, implacably hostile to them, wants to interfere in their domestic policies, wants to run their elections, wants to decide who should be free and who should not, and who should be elected to their parliament and who should not, and is prepared to to broadcast directly to Russia that which is straightforwardly a propaganda channel.
Yeah. No wonder Farage was so happy to get out of the parliament. You got to hand it to the guy to stay in the parliament and deal with a bunch of bozos like that. Man, he is a hero. He is my freaking hero, man. No wonder he was so happy to get out of there dealing with a bunch of dummies like that on a day-by-day basis. I mean, people in the EU parliament are idiots. Plain and simple.
Absolutely.
No wonder the EU is going to fail.
Absolutely. I mean, as I said, first of all, bringing Bellingcat into all of this in the first place is bonkers. But I mean, to lose sight of the fact that Bellingcat is no longer EU based. I mean, it's. Anyway.
You know, they say here. I'm going to read you a part from RT, which says that as part of the vision for future ties with Moscow, the paper concludes that the EU should put forward a number of incentives designed to persuade Russians that a turn to the West would be beneficial, including visa liberalization and free trade investment. Ooh, like the Russians give a crap. Let me tell you what would happen if Russian tourism pulled out of Europe. Cyprus, Greece, Italy, Spain would literally sink. You think they're bad now? Their economies are bad now? If they decided to not holiday in those countries because the EU decided to put some visa restrictions to play it tough, it would be a freaking disaster in those countries. I mean, a tourist summer disaster. They also say, quote, waging a war against the people of Russia, that Putin is waging a war against the people of Russia. Have these people been to Russia? Do they know what the hell they're talking about? It must make them, the only thing I can think of is it must make them, one is they're stupid. These are really dumb people. Number two, they talk about democracy when I think it's pretty safe to say that the European Union is perhaps the most undemocratic, the least democratic institution on the entire planet. I think North Korea is more democratic than the European Union. I never voted for van der Leyen. I never voted for Michel. I never voted for Juncker or Tusk or Barroso or Lagarde or any of these bozos. So for them to talk about democracy is ridiculous. We mentioned Assange and human rights. We mentioned the restrictions that the EU has had. Russia, I don't believe Russia has closed down throughout the pandemic. I mean, closed down as a country. I mean, they put restrictions, but they haven't created a whole blanket thing to close down everything. And the fact that they talk about Putin waging a war against his own people, language like this these aren't diplomats.
No, they're
these
not.
really are not diplomats. These are real dummies in charge.
No, they're not. They are not serious people. By the way, those words are indeed in the document. They're in paragraph E on page 4, and they are: whereas the 5 EU guiding principles for relations with Russia have deterred the Kremlin regime from further aggression against Ukraine, they are silent with respect to containing, note the word containing, President Putin's war against the people of Russia. Those words are there. I mean, this is not a serious document, and the people who have drafted it are not serious people. I say that, though I understand that the person who drafted it was Andreas Kubilius, who I believe was Andreas Kubilius, who I believe was once the Prime Minister of Lithuania. But I mean, this is a ludicrous document. That sort of language should not appear in any kind of parliamentary resolution. It's certainly not diplomatic language by any kind of measure. I mean, the people who write this are so completely, as I said, detached from reality that they're on another planet, and they're talking to themselves. They're only talking ultimately to themselves because no one else is going to take it seriously except the Russians, who will be made very, very angry about it. And when I say the Russians, I don't just mean President Putin and his government, but also ordinary Russians who will read these fantastic things that have been said about their country.
Yeah, I mean, it must drive them crazy, the Europeans, the woke Europeans and the woke ideology and the SJWs and all these people that have infected, and literally destroyed the West. It must make them crazy, drive them crazy that they can't tame Russia, that they can't bring Russia down. It must drive them absolutely nuts.
Well, I think that's entirely right. And I suspect this is the reason, by the way, for this bizarre statement. Because let's think about it. What's actually happened this year? I mean, they probably had very, very high hopes of what would happen when the new administration took office. They probably expected that there would be all sorts of tremendous steps taken, and that, you know, Putin and Russia would be in crisis now. And what we see instead is that the coup attempt in Belarus failed. Whatever the Ukrainians were attempting to do in eastern Ukraine failed, and Biden is now pushing for a summit meeting with Putin. And we've just heard the news that Nord Stream 2 is going to go ahead. So they must feel that it's all going wrong and things are going out of, in the opposite direction to the one they want. And so they publish ridiculous statements like this, because, as you rightly said, the fact that things are not going their way is driving them crazy. But there we are. Crazy this is. Damaging it is also because, as I said, Russian leaders and the Russian public reading these things, and by the way, I should say Russians, in my experience, are, and I'm talking about, ordinary Russians, are very well informed about these kind of matters. Russians are going to be very, very angry when they read statements like this about their own country. Just think what Americans would feel, for example, if some country were to talk about their country in that way, some parliament somewhere were to talk about their country in that way. No one does, by the way, not even North Korea or Iran, because the North Koreans and the Iranians are obviously or apparently more serious people than the people who are elected to that very democratic parliament that the EU has.
Do the Europeans, final question, do the Europeans not understand this person that drafted it, the former, I think you said the former president or prime minister
Prime Minister,
prime minister of Lithuania, you said?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So they're hostile. Obviously, the Baltic states are hostile towards Russia. Fine, we understand the history and the geopolitics and everything involved there. But do the Europeans as a whole, the European Parliament, not understand that they're the institution? They are the countries that are collapsing and crumbling. They're the ones with massive debt. They're the ones whose societies have been completely upended. They're the ones that have lost all reality, all connection to their country, their history, their culture. Do they not see that the EU as a whole and each member country, they're the ones that are going to crumble and collapse, and not the Russias and the Chinas and all these countries that they call enemies? And one of the reasons that their countries are going to collapse, and they are collapsing on many, so from a society level to a very real economic level. I mean, we've talked about France, we've talked about Italy, and you can go all the way down the line to even the smaller countries. One of the big reasons they're collapsing is because of this woke ideology, which is completely destroying the fabric of society. The building blocks of society are being destroyed. And it's the ideology that the Russian people are saying, no, thank you. We've been there. We've done the communist thing. We've done the Lenin Trotsky thing. We've done the no religion thing. We've done, the equity and the critical race theory thing. It was called something different back then under Lenin and under communism and Stalin and all that stuff, all that bad period. But they've been there and they've done that. Do the Europeans not see these? Are they so, my point is, are they so much in a bubble? And do they actually think that the Russians are going to go along with this and say, Navalny, President Navalny, you're here, and let's implement critical race theory in every company and equity and, videos of Kamala Harris going to school when she was a little girl? I mean, I'm trying to figure out their thinking here.
No, to answer your question, I mean, they don't understand any of this. I mean, they do believe that they are still the great, power, that they're the great moral force in their own conception. Presumably they think they are, but they really do believe these things. I mean, they are that detached from reality that they still imagine it. They haven't woken up to the fact that there is a world outside the European Union which is forging ahead, becoming stronger, developing faster, will very soon become richer, in many respects already is richer. They're oblivious to the realities that much of Southern Europe is in a terrible way, and a terrible way that is getting worse. They don't see the fact that there is opposition to them in Italy, and growing opposition to them in France, where opinion polls now show a majority for Frexit. And of course, they can't get their heads around the fact that the British have left. So, I mean, they do inhabit this bubble. And you could see, and what comes across from this, as I said, ludicrous document, is, that these are these are not likable people. And it shows how incredibly angry they are, and how they still think they possess power and can change governments in countries like Russia and can force people like Navalny on the Russians with all the package of things that you were talking about. They still think they can do that, even though in reality they can't. So they don't think these things. They don't see these things. They're ideologically too blinkered to see these things. If they did start to grasp all of that, I mean, their entire worldview would just collapse, and they wouldn't know what to do. So they refuse to see that. And the fact that things are not going their way makes them incredibly angry. And they're convinced that the reason things are not going their way is not because they don't have the power to achieve all these things, but because they believe that people are too pusillanimous at the top of the EU institutions or Western governments to actually change these things. They don't have any real conception of the shift in the balance of world power that is going on around them. That is not something they're capable of seeing or understanding at all.
Yeah. All right, we'll leave it there. Look for us, guys, on Odyssey, on SuperU, BitChute, and join our locals community as well. The community is thriving and it's a lot of fun. So find us there. You'll find all those links down below. And of course, go to the Duran shop. 10% off when you use the code REALNEWS off all our merchandise and magic mugs. Take care.